What happened here was a U.S. escort ship, the Vincennes, found it was being attacked by Iranian speedboats here in the Persian Gulf, detected an air threat, what perceived to be an air threat. It's actually an Iranian passenger jet, fired on it, brought it down, all aboard were killed. The Iranian leadership now felt there was nothing they could do to win this war. America had been surreptitiously supporting Iraq since 1983, overtly here in the tanker war. The shooting down of the Iranian airliner was a straw that broke the camel's back, if you will.
Iran, meanwhile, made its most important land gain, the Four Peninsula, taken in 1986 in a major thrust against the old target of Basra. This effectively cut Iraq off completely from the Gulf and the disputed Ubiyan Island area that would lead to its invasion of Kuwait. Offensive Wa'al al-Fajr 8 brought Iranian forces closest to the objective that had eluded them for so long. 3 Iraqi armored columns were destroyed as the Iranians made gains they were to retain for nearly a year. They had caught Iraq's static defenses by surprise to occupy land of no military importance but immense political significance. But the biggest prize, Basra, eluded them, just as large Iranian cities had defied Iraqi encirclement years before. Yet Iran itself had failed to learn that lesson, and this was the closest they got. Devastating barrages by rockets and artillery, backed by armored assaults, eventually enabled Iraq to break the Iranian stranglehold. With Iran eventually war-weary and on the brink of accepting the United Nations peace call, Iraqi forces once again poured across the border in a last-ditch land grab. Although the war had failed to produce a clear victor, Iraq's supreme leader Saddam Hussein contrived to convince his people that they had won despite failing in all his war aims. Saddam had made one clear gain: popular unity. On the banks of the war-torn Shatt al-Arab waterway, statues of 99 of Saddam's fallen commanders point accusingly at Iran, glossing over the fact that it was Iraq which opened hostilities. Grandiose monuments like Baghdad's Arch of Swords were erected to celebrate Saddam's triumph over the hated Persians, complete with its cascade of helmets from the battlefield. Iraq ended the war with a standing army of awesome size, 1 million men under arms, 5 times as many as in 1980. They were armed with the latest rockets, tanks and artillery, but to pay for them, Iraq's economy had been mortgaged to the tune of nearly $100 billion. At the same time, the oil industry, its biggest earner, was devastated. 10 million shells had landed in the Basra oil fields alone, and essential facilities now lay in ruins. Iraq's invasion of Kuwait brought Baghdad several rewards: enlarged oil production and revenue, the cancellation of war debts, and the satisfaction of an ancient territorial claim. Though clearly threatened, the takeover still caught civilians by surprise, and they fled inland as the invaders poured onto Kuwait City's beaches. The vastly outnumbered Kuwaitis offered unexpectedly stiff resistance, but they were seriously outgunned and outnumbered as the Iraqi assault focused on the barracks of Kuwait's elite Royal Guard, centre of resistance beside the ruling Emir's palace. That resistance crumbled with the arrival of Iraqi helicopter gunships, but the world reacted with unprecedented solidarity. The United States aircraft carrier Independence spearheaded a huge multinational force gathered to police the Gulf and support the state next door to be at risk, Saudi Arabia. Black Hawk and Apache helicopters were poured in numbers not seen since the Vietnam War. Armored divisions, American and British, were shipped to the area backed by troops from the United States and Iraq's rivals for Middle East leadership, Egypt and Syria. Hundreds of thousands of men now prepared for a further Gulf War.
All right, a lot going on in that documentary. I'm going to take a step backwards to the earlier days of this conflict. Because what we're going to talk about now, using 5 pieces of primary source evidence, is a relationship between the United States, Donald Rumsfeld here, special envoy from President Reagan, and Saddam Hussein. We had just been engaged in a hostage crisis with Iran, arch enemy number 1 in 1979-1980. The old cliche, my enemy's enemy is my friend, is true here in Iraq. Our first piece of primary source evidence, the State Department memo, declassified, and thankfully, for our purposes, with what was once blacked out, made visible. What does it say? What is its date? November 1st, 1983. First I'm going to read it just with the white part, just with the uncensored part. Then I'm going to read the whole thing. Censored. We have recently received additional information confirming Iraqi use of chemical weapons. In keeping with our policy of seeking to halt chemical weapons use whenever it occurs, we are considering the most effective means to halt Iraqi chemical weapons use, including, as a first step, a direct approach to Iraq. It is important, however, that we approach Iraq very soon in order to maintain the credibility of U.S. policy on chemical weapons, as well as to reduce or halt Iraq's use of chemical weapons. Now, for the real version. We have recently received additional information confirming Iraq's use of chemical weapons. We also know that Iraq has acquired a chemical weapons production capability, primarily from Western firms, including possibly a U.S. foreign subsidiary. In keeping with our policy of seeking to halt chemical weapons use whenever it occurs, we are considering the most effective means to halt Iraqi chemical weapons use. This would be consistent with the way we handled the initial chemical weapons use information from Southeast Asia and Afghanistan, i.e. private démarches to the Lao, Vietnamese, and Soviet. Démarche is a fancy French diplomatic term meaning contact, meaning a plea for something, a sternly written letter, etc. As you are aware, presently Iraq is at a disadvantage in its war of attrition with Iran. After a recent SIG meeting on the war, a discussion paper is sent to the White House for an NSC meeting. SIG, Special Iraq Group, NSC, National Security Council. A section of which outlines a number of measures we might take to assist Iraq. At our suggestion, the issue of Iraqi chemical weapons use will be added to the agenda for this meeting. If the National Security Council decides measures are to be undertaken to assist Iraq, our best present chance of influencing cessation of chemical weapons use may be in the context of informing Iraq of these measures. November 1st, 1983.